US President Trump has sent the National Guard into LA to put down the protests against immigration officers removing migrants from the city. It's the first time since the 1960s when a president has sent in the Guard without the request of the governor of the state involved. In this case, Governor Newsom, the governor of California, says that the deployment will make things worse. Matthew Syed, we're kind of used to all of this stuff now, but it is extraordinary still. You have Gavin Newsom being called Gavin Newscum by Donald Trump. He's then saying to one of Trump's officials, come and arrest me if you think you're hard enough. There's protesters waving Palestinian flags, Mexican flags. They're throwing rocks. The police and the National Guard are firing rubber bullets. Is there anything we can take from this? What's the lesson you've learned from what's gone on over the last couple of days? Oh, Matthew, there?
I think one lesson is I need to unmute while I clear my throat.
Always a solid lesson. Always a solid lesson.
Yeah, that's important. Always keep that one in mind. But I think we need to hold two thoughts simultaneously. The first is that Trump won a very clear mandate not so long ago on a platform of doing something that the majority of Americans think that the Democrats failed to do, which is strengthen the border and deport some of those who are in the United States illegally. That, I think, is a very important context in all of this, the key context in many ways, and something that we would do well to remember here in the UK, where small boats are still going across the channel and inflaming the Nigel Farage reform movement and infuriating many people who wouldn't describe themselves as right-wing. But we also need to recognise, as you said, that the sending of the National Guard without the request of the state governor is something that is only used in very rare circumstances. Kennedy did so in 1963 to help to desegregate schools in Alabama. I watched Mississippi Burning, the film about this, not so long ago, and you could see that this was something of tremendous significance to the whole country, and that most people felt that Kennedy was entitled to do what he was doing. What worries me about Trump is that he is using this to inflame a situation and gain political capital as a consequence. And this is a president who has breached norms, constitutional and otherwise, and is, I think, a real threat to the consensus that has held this republic together for a very long time. And remember, this is somebody who pardoned people for insurrection in the January assault, including people who committed violence. So this is a hypocritical president. And although I agree with some of what he is doing on illegal immigration, this is a step that I think could become a story of historic significance.
Ashley, you're from the 51st state of America originally. What do you make of it? Because it's clear this is playing out on social media. It's clear that there are petty scores being settled. There's personal abuse and vitriol. There's politics at play here. Are you surprised by that? What do you make of it?
The points we've just heard have been very good. And immigration, don't get me wrong, like immigration can cause all kinds of problems. And there's nothing wrong with wanting a controlled immigration policy. But successive governments have overseen expanding immigration because they've used it intentionally to depress wages and fuel economic growth rather than, infrastructural investments, more dynamic forms of investment. And then they kind of sit back and they've been happy to sit back and see the unrest among their own population against all of this as, wages are depressed. And then they say, oh, well, it's not my fault. It's those immigrants there. And then they promise, oh, don't worry, we'll crack down on these people. And now we're seeing the unrest that results. And actually, I was just reading recently, it's going to seem like a bit of a random reference, but an analysis of the fall of Rome. And, America likes to think of itself as this sort of like successor to the Roman Empire. That part of the immense success was that they'd been quite permissive in the way that they had given out citizenship. Yeah. So how Rome built such a vast empire was that it brought conquered peoples in, offered them a path to belonging, and in return they got loyalty, soldiers, stability. But when they stopped doing that, when they started exploiting immigrants instead of integrating them, things began to fall apart. And the Goths, who famously sacked Rome in 410, had actually fought for Rome. And then they turned on them. And so this is a lesson. This is a lesson to the waning American empire, I think, that they're trying to sort of scapegoat these people who built their empire and now they're rebelling.
It's an interesting point that, good to also have a reference to Rome. My favourite statistic, I know I'm going to say this, Kate, but there was a stat that came out actually about a year ago, which I've never forgotten, which is that the average man thinks about the Roman Empire like once a day. I just love it. I thought
it's a random reference, but men will love it.
Once an hour, wasn't it?
It was some extraordinary thing, but it was completely plausible, though, wasn't it, Matthew? It was 4 times a day. I was like, yeah, that's probably true. You've written a lot, Matthew, about this question of politicians lying about immigration, which in some ways is perhaps the main political thread across the West in the last 20 years, that immigration is, both politicians rely upon it and they lie about it, and then they try and find a reason why they can't control it. And that leads to all sorts of political movements, and probably is a major factor in the state of politics today.
Well, I think it's very important to make a distinction between legal and illegal immigration. I think what British politicians, and to an extent American and other Western politicians, have lied about is legal immigration. The Tories promised to cut it, you'll remember, and then took it to unprecedented levels. And the reason that it is expedient in the short term to have lots of legal immigration, people with visas to do work that locals don't necessarily want to do, because it can fuel a sort of artificial type of economic growth, but not real economic growth. So I think that has happened. What mystifies me, Stig, is why we haven't got on top of illegal immigration. That can be done quite straightforwardly, in my view. But we've kept.
Well, how though, Matthew? Because we talk about this. We talk about this every single week. How difficult it is to stop the small boats crossing. How difficult it is to stop illegal immigration.
The reason it's not difficult operationally, it's difficult legally. We are signatories to conventions, the refugee conventions and the protocol, as well as a human rights framework. That means if we do try and deport people to third countries where they may be at risk, we are prevented to doing so by the courts. You need to change the legal framework.
So would you come out of these conventions, Matthew? Do you think we should come out of them? Because that's becoming
I've argued.
Go on.
Stig, I've made the argument for many years that we should, with other Western nations if possible, redraft the human rights framework and the refugee conventions, because all of us are suffering from this, and we are handing a huge incentive to Putin to stoke conflict in Central Africa, to increase the flow of misery into Europe, because they don't want to go to Russia. And by deterring it, we would open the space for safe and legal routes, so that people could come here, people we had vetted in advance, rather than young men working with criminal gangs and dying in the water. I've not spoken to a single politician who disagrees, but all of them are overly sensitive about redrafting these conventions. And I think it's because of a misplaced liberal sensibility. These laws are iniquitous, so we need to change it. And I hope we do so urgently. A number of nations have actually come forward now. Starmer's government wasn't one of them, to say we need to redraft. Why are we so slow? This will happen eventually. Many of the things that I think we argue in the Times will happen, but it's remarkable how slow and lacking in agility the Western world is at the moment.
There is an update on what's been going on in LA, which is where we started this conversation. A total of 27 arrests were made in downtown LA on Sunday. That's from the LAPD Police Chief Jim McDonnell. He said that the alleged crimes included throwing a Molotov cocktail at an officer and ramming a motorbike into a police line. 17 arrests on Sunday were made by the California Highway Patrol. They were clearing protesters from the 101 highway. The LAPD made 10 other arrests during scuffles downtown. That's the latest on that story. We'll bring you more on that throughout the day here on Times Radio.